Refuse to be ordinary. When people say something is impossible, what they really mean is that they don't see a way. That doesn't mean there isn't one. The difference between ordinary and extraordinary is often nothing more than the willingness to keep asking, what if it is possible? Ordinary is safe, ordinary is predictable, ordinary is what the world trains you to settle for, but progress, real progress, doesn't come from ordinary. It comes from unreasonable persistence, from challenging assumptions, from staring at the blank space where no roadmap exists and deciding to build one. You don't need permission to think differently. You don't need credentials stamped by the world's approval to create something remarkable. What you need is obsession, relentless curiosity, the refusal to let go of an idea even when every voice around you says you should. Understand this. Being different isn't comfortable. You will be doubted. You will be ridiculed. You will fail. Spectacularly, but failure isn't the end. It's the tuition you pay for greatness. The real risk is not in failing. It's in living a life so safe, so cautious, that you reach the end and realize you never even tried. The future is built by people who refuse to be ordinary, people who say, why not? Why not go further, faster, higher? Why not reimagine the way we live, the way we work, the way we dream? So when you are faced with the choice to conform or to create, to settle or to stretch, choose the path that scares you. Choose the path that makes others roll their eyes. Choose the path that demands more of you than you think you have, because that's where extraordinary lives. Refuse to be ordinary, because ordinary never changed the world. Challenge the impossible. Turn failure into fuel. Choose the uncomfortable path. Create, don't conform. When someone tells you something is impossible, what they are really giving you is a reflection of their own limits, not yours. The word itself, impossible, has been used for centuries to cage imagination, to prevent people from even attempting what lies outside the borders of current knowledge or capability. But history is full of examples where impossible became inevitable, where people who were bold enough to question the assumption created breakthroughs that shifted the trajectory of civilization. The truth is, most of what we call impossible is just something that hasn't been done yet, and the only way to find out is to challenge it. Challenging the impossible starts with mindset. Most people grow up learning to accept boundaries. They are told what works and what doesn't, what's realistic and what's a waste of time, what is considered achievable and what is dismissed as fantasy. These boundaries are useful for keeping society orderly, but they are also dangerous because they discourage the very spirit of exploration that drives human progress. To challenge the impossible, you have to learn to see those boundaries not as laws of nature, but as temporary barriers that exist until someone decides to break through them. It requires rejecting the instinct to dismiss radical ideas and instead leaning into them with curiosity. Consider how breakthroughs have always begun with a refusal to accept the ordinary. Flight, for example, was long considered an absurd dream. The idea that heavier than air machines could carry humans into the sky was ridiculed by scientists and engineers alike. Yet the Wright brothers, who were not formally trained aeronautical experts, refused to accept that impossibility. They studied wind patterns, built prototypes, crashed countless times, and learned incrementally until their persistence rewrote what was possible. Their success didn't come from accepting the wisdom of the day. It came from challenging it directly. That same principle applies today in every field. If you are an engineer, you're told that certain performance thresholds can't be surpassed. If you're in medicine, you're warned that some diseases can't be cured. If you're in business, you hear that certain markets can't be disrupted. But the frontier of progress lies precisely where experts stop believing. To challenge the impossible is to step into that frontier willingly, to treat it not as a wall but as a question. What would it take to make this real? The process of challenging the impossible is never straightforward. It is not about blind optimism or reckless ambition. It is about systematically questioning assumptions, breaking big problems into smaller ones, and relentlessly experimenting. Every failure becomes data, every setback becomes a clue. Ordinary thinkers stop when they fail because they assume the failure proves the impossibility. Extraordinary thinkers dig deeper, asking why it failed, adjusting variables, and trying again. They recognize that impossibility often hides in complexity, and complexity can be untangled step by step. Another key element is obsession. Ordinary effort will never break impossible barriers. The energy required to push through skepticism, resistance, and repeated failure is far beyond what casual interest can supply. It takes a level of focus that borders on obsession. You have to be willing to think about the problem when others are asleep, to keep refining ideas after the world tells you to move on, to see potential where others only see dead ends. That intensity is often misunderstood as impracticality or arrogance, but in reality, it is the price of reshaping possibility. Fear also plays a role. Many people don't challenge the impossible not because they lack intelligence or resources, but because they fear looking foolish. They fear criticism. They fear that the pursuit will lead to wasted years and no results. Fear is one of the greatest protectors of the ordinary, but what if fear was reframed? Instead of fearing failure, what if you feared regret? Instead of worrying about ridicule, what if you worried about living a life defined by limits you never tested? The courage to challenge the impossible comes not from eliminating fear, but from deciding which fear matters more. When you look at technology, space exploration, energy innovation, or any transformative field, the people who lead breakthroughs are rarely the ones who follow the safe, ordinary path. They are the ones who took on challenges that looked absurd at the time. Building reusable rockets, creating artificial intelligence that can learn, developing vehicles that can drive themselves, all of these ideas were once dismissed as fantasy, but the people behind them didn't stop at the dismissal. They took it as a provocation. They leaned in, asked harder questions, and built solutions piece by piece until the impossible became visible to everyone else. Challenging the impossible also requires ignoring the comfort of consensus. Ordinary thinkers often find safety in agreement. They want validation before they act, assurance that they're moving in the right direction. But if you wait for consensus, you'll always be late. The impossible is only impossible because the majority can't yet see the pathway to achievement. That means you'll be misunderstood for a long time before you're proven right. If you need applause to sustain your effort, you won't make it through the silence. To challenge the impossible, you have to be willing to walk alone, to trust evidence more than opinion, to prioritize progress over popularity. There is also a practical side, resources, time, and discipline. People sometimes assume that challenging the impossible is purely about inspiration, about dreaming big, but it's also about execution at the highest level. You have to master the details. You have to manage resources efficiently, assemble the right people, and build systems that scale. An impossible idea doesn't transform reality just because you believe in it. It transforms reality because you grind through the details with persistence that outlasts doubt. What makes the impossible worth pursuing is not only the break through itself, but also the ripple effects. When you challenge the impossible and succeed, you redefine the landscape for everyone else. You open doors that others didn't know existed. You inspire a new generation to ask questions they were afraid to ask. The act of breaking one barrier often creates pathways to solve other problems previously assumed unsolvable. In that sense, challenging the impossible is not just about personal ambition, it's about collective progress. Even when you don't fully succeed, the attempt itself changes the equation. If you aim for what others call impossible and fall short, you often still land far beyond the ordinary. Your effort stretches the boundaries of knowledge, sparks new ideas, and creates stepping stones for those who come after. The pursuit of impossible goals forces innovation in ways that ordinary goals never can. It's not just about achieving one audacious target. It's about accelerating the entire ecosystem of discovery. The mindset of challenging the impossible is not reserved for scientists, entrepreneurs, or inventors. It applies to anyone who refuses to live within narrow definitions of what can or cannot be done. It applies to the artist who pushes boundaries of creativity, to the athlete who surpasses limits of endurance, to the leader who reimagines what society can achieve. Impossible is not a fixed reality. It is a label placed by those unwilling to test their limits. By questioning it, by pushing against it, by refusing to accept it, you expand what is available not only to yourself, but to everyone else who follows. Failure is one of the most misunderstood forces in human progress. Most people see it as a verdict, a sign that they weren't good enough, smart enough, or lucky enough. They treat failure as the end of the story. But those who achieve extraordinary things know that failure is never the end. It is data, it is feedback, it is fuel. If you strip away the fear and embarrassment attached to it, failure becomes the most powerful tool for growth, the one that teaches lessons success never could. Turning failure into fuel means embracing it not as something to be avoided, but as something to be harnessed, something that sharpens you into someone capable of greater breakthroughs. Every attempt that fails reveals something you didn't know before. It shows you weak spots in your design, flaws in your assumptions, or gaps in your preparation. Failure is brutally honest. It doesn't flatter you. It doesn't soften the truth. It doesn't protect your ego. It tells you exactly where you stand, whether you're ready to hear it or not. If you can learn to see this honesty as a gift, you gain an advantage over those who run from it. They may protect their pride by avoiding risk, but they also avoid growth. You, on the other hand, can extract insights from every crash, every rejection, every collapse, and channel them into your next move. Think about how innovation happens in science and technology. Experiments fail far more often than they succeed. But each failed experiment eliminates one wrong path, one false assumption. Over time, this narrowing process leads closer and closer to the breakthrough. If scientists gave up after a handful of failures, medicine would have no cures, engineering would have no advancements, and exploration would never move beyond the horizon. The very nature of discovery demands failure, because the unknown cannot be mapped without missteps. Turning failure into fuel means reframing each step not as defeat, but as refinement. The psychological shift required is enormous. From childhood, people are conditioned to fear failure. Schools grade students in ways that punish mistakes rather than rewarding effort. Workplaces create cultures where failure is seen as incompetence rather than experimentation. Society conditions people to avoid failure at all costs, to stick with the safe path, to do what has already been proven. But greatness demands the opposite. It demands risk. It demands putting yourself in situations where failure is not just possible but inevitable. To turn failure into fuel, you must unlearn what the world taught you about shame and start to treat failure as part of the process. Failure also tests resilience in a way success never does. When you succeed easily, you don't discover the limits of your persistence, but when you fail, again and again, you are forced to make a choice, give up or push harder. Those who give up never realize how much more they were capable of. Those who push harder, who keep moving despite the setbacks, discover that resilience is like a muscle. It grows stronger with use. Every failure you survive becomes proof that you can endure more than you thought. Every time you rise after being knocked down, you develop the psychological armor necessary to tackle even greater challenges. Some of the most successful innovators, creators, and leaders are people whose failures were colossal. They risked more than others dared, so naturally their failures were louder and more visible. but those failures became their training ground. Each one built discipline, sharpened strategy, and clarified vision. What looked from the outside like disasters were, on the inside, essential chapters of preparation. Turning failure into fuel means refusing to let the narrative of loss define you. It means taking control of the story, extracting its lessons, and reinvesting the knowledge into your next attempt. Another dimension of failure is how it forces creativity. Success tends to reinforce existing patterns. You do what works, so you keep doing it. Failure disrupts those patterns. It forces you to look at problems from angles you hadn't considered before, to challenge assumptions you were blind to invent solutions that only pressure could provoke. Some of the most groundbreaking innovations are born not from success but from desperation, from the necessity to find a way forward after failure has closed every familiar door. In this sense, failure doesn't just teach, it provokes imagination. It creates the conditions where originality thrives. Failure also creates humility. Success can inflate ego, making you think you're untouchable. Failure strips away illusion and reminds you that you are still learning, still vulnerable, still in need of improvement. That humility is a strength because it keeps you open to feedback, willing to collaborate, hungry to grow. It prevents complacency and keeps you sharp. In many ways, failure is the antidote to arrogance, ensuring that those who achieve greatness remain grounded enough to keep building. One of the biggest obstacles to turning failure into fuel is the perception of others. Society celebrates success and mocks failure. People fear judgment, gossip, and ridicule, but this external noise is irrelevant compared to your own trajectory. The opinions of bystanders don't change the truth. Failure is part of the path to mastery. Those who criticize from the sidelines are often the ones too afraid to try anything themselves. When you learn to detach from their opinions, failure loses much of its sting. You realize that the only measure that matters is whether you're still moving forward. Failure also has a compounding effect. Each failure, if treated as fuel, makes you better equipped for the next challenge. Over time, this creates exponential growth. What once seemed overwhelming becomes manageable. What once took months of effort takes weeks. What once felt like an impossible leap becomes a small step. The reason is simple. Failure accelerates learning. It compresses lessons into sharp, unforgettable experiences. Those who avoid failure move slowly because they never learn deeply enough. Those who embrace failure move fast because every misstep accelerates their understanding. The paradox is that the more you fail, the more resilient you become, and the more resilient you become, the more likely you are to succeed in the long run. Success, when it finally arrives, is built on a mountain of failures repurposed into wisdom. Without them, the success would be shallow and fragile. With them, the success is durable and transformative. Turning failure into fuel is not about romanticizing struggle. It's about recognizing that struggle is the only path to strength. Failure also reveals what truly matters to you. If you fail at something and walk away easily, it wasn't your passion. But if you fail and still feel compelled to return, to keep working, to try again no matter how hard it hurts, that is where your deepest purpose lies. Failure is a filter. It exposes what you care about so much that even repeated setbacks cannot extinguish the fire. That fire is essential because only with that kind of passion can you sustain the effort required for greatness. Ultimately, failure is inevitable for anyone who dares to attempt something significant. You can avoid it only by living small, by refusing to take risks, by staying comfortably within the limits of what has already been done. But if you want to grow, to create, to lead, to innovate, you will encounter failure again and again. The question is not whether you will fail, but how you will respond. Will you see it as the end, or will you use it as fuel for the next attempt, stronger and smarter than before. The comfortable path is lined with predictability. It is safe, familiar, and free from unnecessary turbulence. It promises stability, but it also quietly robs you of growth. Choosing the uncomfortable path means deliberately stepping into spaces where the outcome is uncertain, where the risk of failure is real, and where you will be pushed beyond what feels manageable. It is an act of defiance against the natural human instinct to seek safety, because deep down, comfort is the enemy of progress. Growth is always uncomfortable. Transformation is always uncomfortable. Everything worthwhile in life requires moving into territory that unsettles you. The uncomfortable path is the one that forces you to stretch. It demands skills you do not yet have, confidence you have not yet built, and strength you do not yet realize is within you. This is why most people avoid it. They would rather stay where they feel capable and in control. But the truth is, the capabilities you admire in others, courage, resilience, mastery, are not things they were born with fully developed. They were forged in the fire of discomfort. They became strong because they chose the path that tested them. They became leaders because they walked roads others were afraid to travel. Fear is the strongest gatekeeper of the uncomfortable path. It whispers reasons to stay where you are. What if you fail? What if you embarrass yourself? What if you lose everything? These questions are designed to paralyze you, but the real question is, what if you never try? What if you live your whole life avoiding fear and end up never discovering who you could have become? The uncomfortable path may involve risk, but the greater risk lies in comfort. Comfort locks you into a cycle of repetition. It lulls you into thinking you are safe, when in reality you are stagnant. The uncomfortable path teaches you more in 1 year than the comfortable path teaches you in 10. This is because pressure accelerates learning. When you are thrown into situations where the stakes are high and the environment is unfamiliar, you are forced to adapt quickly. You pick up new knowledge, refine your instincts, and develop mental toughness. You discover hidden potential in yourself that you would never find in a place where everything is easy. The lessons of discomfort are sharp, unforgettable, and powerful. Discomfort is also the birthplace of creativity. When everything around you is predictable, you default to routines and patterns, but when you are forced out of routine, when your resources are limited, when your old solutions don't work, you begin to think differently. You start to innovate. Many of history's greatest ideas were born not from comfort but from struggle. When the mind is under pressure, it finds pathways that comfort would never allow you to see. The uncomfortable path strips away complacency and forces originality. There is also the element of resilience. Taking the uncomfortable path ensures that you will face setbacks. You will fall, you will struggle, you will doubt yourself. But resilience does not come from reading about perseverance in a book. It comes from living through hardship and realizing you can survive it. Every challenge you endure becomes proof of your strength. Every difficulty you overcome becomes a brick in the foundation of unshakable confidence. Over time, you begin to realize that discomfort no longer intimidates you. It fuels you. What once terrified you becomes manageable, and what once seemed impossible becomes a normal part of your capacity. Choosing discomfort also changes your relationship with failure. When you repeatedly step into difficult terrain, failure stops being an identity and becomes an event. You stop taking it personally. You stop seeing it as the end. Instead, you start to see it as part of the process. You learn to fail quickly, adapt quickly, and try again with more knowledge. This resilience compounds over time, making you unstoppable to obstacles that paralyze others. While they retreat to safety after failure, you keep moving forward because discomfort has taught you that failure is never final. The uncomfortable path also separates you from the majority. Most people settle for ease. They want guarantees. They want to know the outcome before they even begin. But those who choose discomfort willingly stand apart. They are the ones who take the leaps others avoid, who pursue visions others dismiss, who build futures others think unrealistic. This separation is what creates leaders. The path of comfort produces followers. The path of discomfort produces pioneers. It is important to recognize that discomfort doesn't always mean physical risk or dramatic upheaval. Sometimes it is as simple as speaking when you would rather stay silent, admitting what you don't know, or asking questions that make people uncomfortable. Sometimes it is moving to a new city, taking on a new project, or walking away from something that no longer aligns with your values. Discomfort manifests in many forms, but the common thread is that it always pushes you outside your usual limits, and every time you step into it, you expand those limits. The uncomfortable path is also the only place where true confidence is built. Confidence does not come from affirmations or empty encouragement. It comes from evidence. It comes from seeing yourself survive what you once thought you couldn't handle. It comes from doing what scared you and realizing that fear didn't destroy you. This type of confidence is unshakable because it is earned. It cannot be faked, and it cannot be given by others. It only comes from repeatedly choosing discomfort over safety. Discomfort sharpens clarity. When you are challenged, your values become clearer, your priorities more defined. You realize what matters enough to endure struggle for, and what doesn't deserve your energy. Comfort clouds judgment, because when nothing is at stake, everything feels equally important. But when you are tested, distractions fall away. The uncomfortable path strips life down to its essentials, and in that clarity you make better decisions. It is also worth noting that the uncomfortable path builds credibility. People respect those who walk into challenge rather than avoiding it. They recognize the courage it takes, and they are drawn to follow leaders who embody that strength. If you want influence, if you want to inspire, you must be willing to step into discomfort first. Others will believe in you not because you talk about courage, but because you live it. Every major turning point in life demands discomfort. The first steps of learning a new skill, the leap into a new opportunity, the pursuit of an idea others laugh at, all of them feel daunting at the start. That feeling is not a signal to stop. It is a signal you are on the right path. Growth hides behind discomfort, and the more you learn to associate that feeling with progress, the more unstoppable you become. The uncomfortable path is not for everyone, which is exactly why it holds so much power. It filters out those unwilling to endure difficulty, leaving opportunities open for those bold enough to step forward. It is not the easy path, but it is the only one that leads to transformation. Each time you face the choice between what is safe and what is uncomfortable, you face a decision about who you will become. To create rather than conform is to embrace the role of builder, not follower. Conformity is easy because the rules are already written, the paths already paved, the expectations already set. It requires little imagination to move within the boundaries others have established. But creation is different. Creation demands that you step into uncharted space, where no guide exists, and no approval is guaranteed. It is an act of defiance against the ordinary, because it asserts that you will not simply accept the world as it is handed to you. You will shape it, change it, and leave behind something that did not exist before. Conforming is seductive because it promises belonging. When you conform, you are accepted. You don't stand out, you don't provoke criticism, and you don't risk rejection. The problem is that conformity also erases individuality. It smooths out the edges that make you unique and suppresses the voice that might challenge the status quo. Creation, on the other hand, exposes you. It puts your ideas on display, makes you vulnerable to skepticism, and forces you to defend your vision. But in that vulnerability lies authenticity. To create is to stand firmly in your own originality, to refuse to be absorbed into the sameness of the crowd. Every innovation humanity has celebrated was born from the refusal to conform, At one point or another, every breakthrough was dismissed as unnecessary or impossible. The inventors, artists, and leaders who built them could have chosen the comfort of conformity, but they didn't. They saw what others didn't, and instead of bending to collective doubt, they chose to give their ideas form. The result is progress. Conformity maintains the present. Creation invents the future. To create requires courage because the act itself is disruptive. New ideas destabilize established systems. They threaten people who benefit from the way things already are. That is why creators often face resistance, ridicule, or even hostility. Conformists avoid this entirely, which is why most people prefer conformity over creation. But the uncomfortable truth is that resistance is a sign you are making impact. If your work provokes reaction, it means it is powerful enough to matter. True creation doesn't blend in, it challenges. Another element of creation is vision. Conformity follows templates. It looks to what others are doing and copies it. But creation comes from a willingness to imagine what does not yet exist. It starts with asking different questions. What if there were a better way? What if we could reinvent this system? What if we ignored the limits everyone else accepts? Creation requires imagination disciplined by persistence. The initial spark of an idea is only the beginning. The real work comes in shaping it into something tangible, something that can exist outside your mind. That process demands relentless energy, because creating is harder than conforming by orders of magnitude. Creation is also tied to responsibility. When you conform, you can blame the system when things fail. You can say you were just following the rules, just doing what everyone else was doing. But when you create, you take ownership. You stand behind your choices, your work, your vision. That accountability is heavy, but it is also liberating because it means the outcome belongs to you. You are no longer a passive participant in the world. You are an active contributor shaping it. Choosing to create rather than conform does not mean rejecting all tradition or structure. It means questioning it. It means refusing to accept something just because it has always been that way. Some structures are useful, some traditions carry wisdom, but none are beyond examination. The creator's mindset asks why. Why do we do it this way? Why not another way? Why not better? These questions disrupt complacency and open the door to possibilities conformity would never reveal. The act of creation is not limited to massive inventions or world-changing breakthroughs. It exists in everyday life. It's in the way you solve problems differently than others expect, in the way you express your individuality through art, writing, design, or thought, in the way you approach your work with originality rather than repetition. Creation is a choice available to everyone, not just to visionaries or leaders. It begins with the decision to trust your ideas enough to bring them into the world, no matter how small they seem at first. Fear of judgment is one of the strongest forces pulling people toward conformity. When you create, you risk rejection. You risk people not understanding you, mocking you, or dismissing your efforts. But judgment is inevitable regardless of what you do. If you conform, you will be judged for blending in. If you create, you will be judged for standing out. The difference is that creation leaves something behind. Even if your work is misunderstood at first, even if it is rejected, it exists. It adds to the world. Conformity adds nothing. Creation is also inseparable from failure. You cannot create without missteps, without revisions, without discovering that your initial version didn't work. But in the process of failing forward, you refine your idea until it becomes powerful. Conformity avoids failure, but it also avoids progress. Creation embraces failure as part of the deal. It is the only way to make something truly original. The choice to create rather than conform also impacts identity. Conformists often struggle with meaning because their lives are shaped by external standards. They do what is expected, and as a result, they feel replaceable. Creators, on the other hand, experience a deep sense of ownership over their path. Their work carries their imprint. It reflects their values, their imagination, their spirit. This creates fulfillment that conformity can never provide. Creation has another effect. It inspires. When one person refuses to conform and builds something extraordinary, it gives permission for others to do the same. It shows that the rules can be rewritten, that the future is not fixed. One act of creation can spark movements, industries, and revolutions. Conformity cannot do this. At best, it maintains the status quo. At worst, it suffocates potential. To create requires patience. Conformity delivers instant acceptance, but creation often demands years of unseen effort before recognition arrives. Many of the greatest works of art, science, and invention were ignored or mocked in their time, only to be celebrated later. The creator must be willing to persist without applause, to keep building even when the world is indifferent. This endurance is what separates fleeting attempts from lasting contributions. There is also joy in creation that conformity can never offer. The act of bringing something new into existence, of seeing your vision take form, of knowing you produced something no one else could have produced. It is one of the most profound experiences available to humans. It is the essence of being alive. Conformity may keep you safe, but it will never give you that feeling.